It's time to talk about branding. And no, I'm not thinking cowboys. Athletes have always held a certain place of prominence in our society, but it's only lately, I think, that we've really paid attention to their branding process, because branding is becoming an increasingly large part of the world around us. How? Stay tuned. As an aside note, I always like to have pictures of the writer up in the presentations, and for most time it's because we haven't really formed a mental image. But I bet you anything that if you read this and tried to picture the author, he probably looked just like this. A sports writer. Kind of obvious. Anyway, the reason I want to focus on this article is it talks about something called branding. And branding is something we don't tend not to think about as individuals all that much. We think about it as being something mainly for corporations who are trying to sell us something. Branding is an essential strategy if you have a large crowd of people and you want some way to stand out because you don't think you stand out as it is. And I think that kind of transcends just selling us stuff, but selling us stuff is an important part of it. And later on, I'm going to argue that you have a more vested interest in branding than you really think. But if you are able to make yourself stand out from the crowd, people will remember you better and can treat you better. That's the essence of branding. Now, branding has been something that athletes tend to talk about an awful lot because athletes nowadays, well, for the last 40, 50 years, whatever, many athletes make a lot more money from their endorsements than they do from their actual contract. I think I remember hearing Michael Jordan was the first one who was like that. He was making a decent amount of money playing basketball, but he was making a whole lot of money endorsing pretty much everything known to mankind. And it got to be a big topic of conversation, one that lots of athletes felt like weighing in on. And I'm going to show you some of these commercials because it'll highlight just how interesting the conversation about branding amongst athletes got. The first one that I remember seeing really weigh into it was the athlete, basketball player, Charles Barkley. I'm going to show you two of his commercials. He really was interested in the whole our athletes role model thing. And I think there's a connection between role model and branding. We'll talk about it in a minute. But first,
I am not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model. I am paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court. Parents should be role models. Just because I dunk a basketball doesn't mean I should raise your kids.
now it's interesting that he's talking about how he's not a role model, but there is definitely an attempt at branding going on. If you ever got to see Mr. Barkley play basketball, he was known for being really physical, and he had a large amount of fines to prove it. But this wasn't his only attempt to talk about role model and branding.
A word from our sponsor.
Dreams come true in my new shoe. That's not what I want to say.
Rewind.
Wow, it's Charles Barkley and his new shoe.
This is my new shoe. It's a good shoe. Won't make you dunk like me. Won't make you rich like me.
Dang!
Won't make you rebound like me. Definitely won't make you handsome like me.
Good.
It'll only make you have shoes like me. Period. Now that's what I want to say.
This one seems to push him a lot farther into the whole branding bit. But, even at the time I watched this and I thought, well, if it's not supposed to make us anything like you, why are you bothering to put your name on it? How are you trying to sell a signature item that you have branded as one of your products and cut it down that way? It's an interesting concept. I'm a role model. Here's something I have with my name on it that you should buy, but not because my name is on it. Branding isn't something that he ever really got away from, and this wasn't his only advertising campaign. And he's far from the last athlete to do branding. The athlete we think about with branding when we think about an athlete is Michael Jordan, but before we talk about Michael Jordan, I wanted to show you another athlete who's really concerned with branding.
What should I do? Should I admit that I've made mistakes? Should I remind you that I've done this before? Want to see my shiny new shoes? Should I just sell shoes? Shiny new shoes? Maybe I should just disappear.
Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I led you to believe it was easy when it wasn't. Maybe I made you think my highlights started at the free throw line and not in the gym. Maybe I made you think that every shot I took was a game winner. That my game was built on flash and not fire. Maybe it's my fault that you didn't see that failure gave me strength, that my pain was my motivation. Maybe I led you to believe that basketball was a God-given gift and not something I worked for every single day of my life. Maybe I destroyed the game. Or maybe you're just making excuses.
This video was done after LeBron James decided to leave Cleveland and go to Miami, so it's several years old. At the time, the people in Cleveland didn't take it particularly well, which is an understatement. I know people nowadays who still say that they'd punch him in the face on sight, even though lots of things have happened since then. But at the time, the hatred was especially vile, and somebody made a parody of that commercial we just saw, but one that focuses on how Clevelanders interpret him leaving town.
What should I do?
What should you do?
Is it even a question?
Loyalty.
What about family?
Just selfish.
You would leave us?
What happened to family?
Bagged out.
Maybe I should just disappear. Should I remind you that I've done this before?
Yeah, we know.
Boston, Game 5. We watched. You quit.
Should I really believe I ruined my legacy?
Legacy? Traders don't leave legacies.
When things get difficult, you run. That's your legacy.
Should I have my tattoo removed?
Yeah.
What should I do? What should I do? What should I do?
You should throw it in our faces on national television. Thanks.
What should we do, LeBron?
What should we do?
Seriously, what should I do?
What should you do?
You could have told us before the last week of free agency you were leaving.
You're a backstabber, LeBron.
Should I be writing this down? Should I be who you want me to be?
We wanted you to be who you said you'd be.
I got a goal, and that's a huge goal, and that's to bring an NBA championship here to Cleveland, and I won't stop till I get it.
LeBron James were poisonous, to say the very least, and it got to be extreme. This is a really good example of brand backlash. You build yourself a brand, and then if you try to change things whatsoever, people who are very much invested in the band are going to take that very seriously. Now, I'm not really sure how most Ohioans still think of him, if they still think of him, but it would be an interesting subject to delve into a little bit more. Now, when we think about branding nowadays, things have been weird, particularly this year when we're not having actual sports, but from the time of LeBron James, America's become a little bit more cynical about their athletes. They've become a little bit more cynical about celebrities too, and what a celebrity should be allowed to do. One of my favorite debates to follow are people who think that entertainers shouldn't speak politically. It seems to be less taboo now than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, but it has been traditionally a widely held belief that sports and entertainment should be political-free zones. This article was from 2008. And I have a little bit of a personal experience with this. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans got leveled pretty much. The site of the Superdome where the New Orleans Saints play games was a refugee center for a long time. If you ever want to be really heartbroken, watch the documentary When the Levees Broke, because it goes into just how trashed New Orleans got as a result of all this. I was a fan of the city of New Orleans. I've been there several times, and it's a place where I kind of wish I was right now, all the time. So I kept a little bit of an interest in this. And at the time, I was still watching football, and it was an interesting time for the New Orleans Saints football team because the building they played in basically had to get rebuilt for them to return. They played a good over a year all away games. And when they did their first home game, year and a half after Katrina, it was a Monday Night Football game, and it was a huge broadcast, and it was a big deal. The pregame started at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The NFL brought out all the stops. Big celebrities, bands playing before, bands playing outside the stadium. It was a televisual event, to say the very least. And during the broadcast, the commentators would pull bits where they'd talk about people living in New Orleans, how they've come back, how they've survived. They even would address things like how big corporations coming in is changing the character of the city a little bit because the people who used to live there didn't have the money to fix up. Lots of big corporations came in and took over lots of business sectors. I went to New Orleans before and after Katrina, and after Katrina, it was more corporate. They talked about poverty. They even addressed that the president at the time took a while to get relief workers to New Orleans. They were taking on pretty much any political issue related to Hurricane Katrina, except for race. And that really shocked me because New Orleans is a multiracial city, to say the very least. They even had Spike Lee on the broadcast, and one of the reporters tried to goad him into saying anything about race, and he wouldn't. So I wrote a paper about this because I thought this was interesting. We're doing a major sports broadcast about a city being reborn, and the city is largely African American, and you're not going to mention that, but you'll mention everything else on TV? I presented this at a conference in New Orleans. And the amount of popular culture scholars who told me that there is no way you can expect sports broadcasts to have any political nature to them was astounding. I was basically told, you're stupid for thinking that politics are a part of sports. I should have saw it coming, really, because whenever an athlete tends to speak out, it is a large discussion that comes up. I don't remember what this particular event was, but I know you can think of this. Boy, did this guy get it for suggesting that politics was an appropriate topic for an athlete. And that's one that's still going on to this day. I mean, the NFL has admitted that banning Colin Kaepernick was a bad idea and they should have listened to him. And of course, the president has come on and said, no, he should be banned. He's still a disgrace to the nation, and so on and so forth. But is this the first time where it's become a big deal that an athlete has gone out for something political? No, not really. The Mexican Olympics, 2 track stars raised their hand in the Black Power salute as a sign of their support for civil rights, and their lives kind of got drastically upended. It's not just sports where people think that politics isn't an appropriate topic. The Emmys, actors in general, musicians. For ages, Taylor Swift would refuse to talk about politics. And she's only recently, like in the last 2 years, started to really bring it up and starting to stake out a position for herself. I guess she thought that labeling herself as political or being labeled as political would be damaging to her career, and we know that she's very good about marketing herself. But this is also something that's been going on for a long time. When Marlon Brando won an Academy Award, he refused to attend the ceremony and instead sent a Native American activist in his place to read a protest speech. There's been this line between politics and branding for entertainers for a long time, and it's been a long, ongoing battle. Now, I think this is interesting into itself, but a lot of you might be asking, why would you care? Well, branding isn't just something corporations and stars do. Personal branding is very much a thing because, like it or not, we're living in an age of social media, and social media is where you put yourself out there, where you broadcast stuff to the world. You can think that you're not engaging in politics, but you're not presenting every second of your day. You're selecting what goes online. And by selecting what goes online, you're at some level putting forth an image of yourself. If you don't sculpt it, who's going to? The companies don't really have a motivation to have you. The companies don't really have a motivation to have you think a lot about it. They just want you to post a lot. There's an ongoing quote that when something online is free, you're not the customer, you're the product. Google is using you. Facebook is using you. Why would you not use them as well? This is something that I talk about with my business writing students a lot because there's this really good advice that when you get into college, you should delete everything you've ever done on social media. Put up new social media profiles that stay strictly professional. And that way you can control how future employers might see you. I have a little bit of an additional angle on the branding thing because I'm a musician, which means my job is to play, not just to play music, but to play music and get people interested in me playing music. So, to the poor extent which I can, I have to think about branding in a certain way. One of the ways I do that is by the flyers I have for my shows. I try to come up with a certain coherent look, a certain coherent image, and it generally ends up by being me manipulating photos to make myself look a little bit weird. Well, let's face it, nobody's going to come see me because I'm the most sexy person in the world. But maybe this might grab their attention. Personal brands are something that people tend not to want to think about, but we're online. We broadcast ourselves fairly regularly. So being aware of how others are receiving us is just kind of good sense in a lot of ways. Plus, when you add commerce into it, it becomes that much more important. Something to think about when you go online later today. See you later. Next time.